Depression to me isn't necessarily feeling sad. It's more of numbness. You don't really feel anything, and you don't really care if you wake up in the morning or not. I guess it's something that I developed quite possibly whenever I was young, but never really fully recognized it until about whenever I was preteen, anywhere between there.
I think your upbringing has a lot to do with, your mindset and your mental state and how you view things. When my parents divorced, I was 4 years old. And until I was like 11 or 12, it was a lot of custody battles between my mom and my dad. And so that I was always struggling. I felt that I was never making the right choice. When I said I want to live with my mom, I felt like I'm doing something wrong. And that's been the case like ever since then. Is I'll make a choice and then I'll think I'm just doing the wrong thing. I've always wanted to please everybody like I did when I was younger. One of the biggest things that was a main theme throughout my whole childhood, my whole upbringing, was that there was always some kind of fighting, not physical violence or not, actually fighting. It was always words and people being hurtful and people arguing. I felt like no matter what I said, it was either I'm not being heard and no one really cares what I had to say, and then on the other end it was, oh, well, they're hearing me. They just don't really care what I'm saying. And I think that more than anything probably carried over to a lot of things that affect me today was that feeling of voicelessness.
I don't really remember my childhood a whole lot. There's just like some things that happened that I just blocked out. My childhood was pretty great until a certain point, and then things just kind of went downhill. Probably when I was 13 or so. My half-sister left the home that we lived in at a very young age to go live with her real mom, and that just kind of, you grew up with somebody that you were so close to, and then they just leave one day. It kind of hurts. And I've just had really close people to me pass away, and that's probably one of the things that affected my childhood drastically, was people dying. I went to school since it's so hard to remember things from me being a kid. I don't normally think about it, so it's all trapped away in my mind. One of the earliest memories I have of my childhood is I was in kindergarten, and kindergarten was the age and grade that I finally that I realized that I have emotions, I guess, because I started to show emotions. And I had two friends. One of them was my best friend and the other one was just my friend, and my best friend was moving schools, and it hurt my feelings, honestly, that she was leaving me. And she gave the other friend a Hello Kitty ring as a goodbye present, and she didn't give me one, so that made me really sad.
I grew up on a farm. I didn't really have much at the time. For about the first 8 years or so of my life, we didn't really have much of anything. My mom and my dad, my mom worked as a nurse aide and my dad worked at a sawmill. So we didn't really have a whole lot of money. The farm that we lived on was my grandma's and my granddad's, and we didn't even have running water in the house. We had wells and all that good stuff. My dad and I, we didn't really have a very good relationship. He was an alcoholic. He was pretty rough. My dad was the harsh one, my mom was the lenient one. My dad had a lot of power over my mom, I guess is the better way to describe it. He was very harsh on my brother and I. And I try to be as happy and caring and stuff as I can be. But just sometimes it would hit just all of a sudden, just like a wave. I could be happy hanging out with 12 of my friends, we could all be out doing something, and then I would be perfectly fine, and then all of a sudden I just wasn't.
At the beginning of 6th grade, I left Cowan because me and my mom had been living with my stepdad, and he abused me, and that came out, and when that came out, that's when I had to move. There were times I didn't want to, I wanted to have something to blame it on. I wanted to say, well, I have these problems because of this, but then sometimes it was hard to, because there were so many things. There was my parents' divorce and all the family issues that I had, and then there was abuse on top of that. And that's what really kick-started my anxiety. It was the feeling of fear that it's going to happen again, paranoia. I started having flashbacks when I started being paranoid, when I would be laying in bed and it was as clear as day, like I could hear the voice of the person that abused me. When it felt like they were in the room, when they clearly weren't. That was terrifying because I didn't know what was causing that. I didn't have a name to it. I felt paranoia, but I didn't know what it was called. I didn't know what paranoia was. I had flashbacks, but I didn't know what a flashback was.
I've struggled with anxiety and depression for a long time. I started noticing changes in my mood and the way I express things probably my 8th grade year. I was about 13, 14. I didn't get depressed until probably my sophomore year in high school. I was really depressed, and by depressed I mean didn't want to continue living, didn't feel like I fit in anywhere, didn't feel like anybody loved me. And anxiety followed with it though. I still struggle with anxiety a lot now than what I did back then.
It had just gotten worse throughout high school. It was constant. My mom, she developed anxiety and that kind of thing too, and she had a panic attack. And whenever I started taking medication and stuff too, it took it a while to work. I will say that, because at first I thought it was kind of bogus. I didn't think that, it actually helped, or maybe I needed a higher dosage or something like that. But after a bit, it wasn't as bad. I did really, really well in high school. I excelled. Because I had a bad home life, I was more dedicated to school than ever, because I didn't want to go home at the end of the day. So I would, I got really involved in band, and I loved band. I was a percussionist for 7 years, and I loved every minute of it. I was in soccer, basketball. I ran track and cross country for a little bit. I even tried cheerleading. I was in academics, you name it. I tried it all, actually.
You can have a psychiatrist talk to you for 3 hours, or a therapist, or you can talk to them and say every single thing that's happened in your life, but it's still hard to grasp what's going on in your mind, because it is so complicated, and it goes so deep, and it's so much more than just feeling sad or just feeling nervous sometimes. And it's a lot more than just having a rough childhood. And so I went to a place called Rivendell down in Bowling Green in Kentucky. And I stayed there maybe a week. I didn't really understand what was going on in my own head. After the first time I went down to Rivendell, I came back, pretty much things were the same at home. And then I was also dealing with the abuse that I suffered. There was a trial coming up, and that terrified me. That is the root of so many of my problems, not just the trauma alone, but the fact that I have to talk about this again. I have to relive it again. I have to see this person. I have to face this person. What if no one believes me? Then this is all going to be for nothing. And it was my mind, it kind of felt like my mind was trying to destroy itself. There were so many things going on. And it was kind of like I was turning against myself. The trial actually happened, So that gave me a little bit of closure. But you can be so far away from the trauma. The trauma can be all the way in the past, and it still seems like it's right there with you sometimes.
The first time that I really felt depressed was when my grandfather passed away, and that was when I was in 8th grade. And like I was emotional, and everybody knew that. Everybody in my family could tell just the way like I acted and talked and the way I shut myself out from everything. And I don't remember exactly how everything played out, but I just remember one day me and my mom got into like a screaming match, and she was like, "What is your deal? Like, what is your problem?" And I was like, "My grandfather just passed away. Like, does that not bother you?" And I feel like since that, she understood a little bit more what was going on. I actually had people help me overcome it, like, you know, friends that, well, technically one friend that would always message me and ask me how I was or what was going on, and they always managed to like talk me through it and make me feel better. You have to be the one to overcome it. You have to make yourself get better. And I struggled with that a lot because I don't have a good drive to make myself do things, so it was hard, but I did it.
My dad was always like verbally abusive, where it would be anything. He would call me stupid. Sometimes he called me a bitch. Sometimes he would, you know, like I'd use obscene, you know, names, anything that would like be able to hurt me. But it wasn't until after my brother moved out that he started to become a little bit more like physically abusive towards me. And when my brother was there, he and I both kind of took the heat, you know. It balanced out a little bit, but after he moved out, I got all the heat. So that's whenever, you know, he would like shove me, you know, he'd smack me. It could be anything like that. But the worst it had ever gotten was whenever I came home from school one day, and I was just tired, and I was just napping, and I had pet turtles at the time. Their tank would get dirty every couple of days, like, because they, you know, they're turtles. Said I was just tired, so whenever I came home, I immediately crashed, and my dad came in and he was mad that I hadn't cleaned my turtles tanks yet. And I remember vividly just being like, you know, I'm sleepy, can I just clean it tomorrow, you know, like that kind of thing. And he just snapped. He went into the bathroom and tore the shower rod down and came back into my room and hit me with it over and over. And I was pretty upset. And then I ended up going to school the next day, and I was limping, and my teacher saw me, and she asked what had happened, and I had lied to her. I told her I'd ran into a bed rail at home, and she just kind of saw, I guess, like the look in my eye, and she pulled me out into the hallway, and she asked me if the abuse was at home or if it was at school. And that's whenever I started crying. And so she took me into the bathroom and she asked me to show her, and I showed her the bruises and stuff. And then it wasn't even maybe an hour or two later, I get a call. I was in class, and the teacher at the time gets a call, and she told me I was needed at the office. And whenever I went down to the office, social services were there, and they pulled me into the back and they talked to me about if I wanted to be in foster care. I started living with my best friend for the longest time. I lived with her for a couple of months. I lived with her, and then my boyfriend at the time actually helped me quite a bit too. His whole family were really, really great, and they were really supportive about me going to therapy and me you know, even getting on medication and that kind of thing. And they helped us move from my dad's house. They even gave us some furniture and stuff too. Like, they gave us a couch. They just did a whole lot for us that really, it did help a lot.
The first time that I actually put action to feeling suicidal. It was actually the day of the Mountain Heritage Parade. But you get to the point to where it seems like that's the only way that anything's going to change. It honestly feels like your only option. And I know that that's really hard for a lot of people to understand that haven't been through it. I just wasn't doing good emotionally or mentally. I just wasn't in a good place. On the way there, I had a terrible argument with my dad. And that was just kind of like the straw that broke the camel's back. I got home. I had a bottle of migraine pills. I don't know how many were in the bottle. It was probably about all the way full. And when I took them, and then that little part of me, I didn't want to die, was screaming, tell somebody, you can't let this happen. So I know I called my mom. I said, Mom, I took some pills. She asked me how many, I told her. So she was immediately like, go tell your dad. I didn't want to tell him because we'd argued that day, and then I thought he's going to be angry at me. He's going to be angry because I didn't tell him. So I walked in there and I gave it to him. I don't remember much of what he said, you know. I was conscious. I was okay at that point. And then we drove to the hospital. I told him, and actually saying it, talking to someone I didn't know and saying, I wanted to end my life. Immediately in my head, I was like, they're gonna think I'm crazy. That's the word that kept going in my head, was crazy. They're gonna think I'm crazy. They're gonna think I'm some crazy kid. My mom was there. Of course, my mom was crying. I was crying. My dad wasn't in the room. And that's when it hit me. I think that was the most impactful experience of my life, because then that's when I really realized I could have done one thing different and I could have died. And I wanted to get help. I didn't know how exactly I was going to get through it, but I knew I needed it.
I was actually kind of going through a rough patch not very long ago. Whenever Mom's boyfriend had passed, and I decided to come back to help her out. I thought that for sure was going to break her. So whenever I moved back to help her, I ended up having to live with my grandma as well, because that's where my mom was staying. And I also lived with my grandmother's sister, so my great aunt, and she's not the nicest person, so we didn't really get along. And she stopped paying the bills, so we didn't have electricity, we didn't have running water in the house. We were just having all kinds of problems, and we would be arguing. There was a day that I came home from work and my aunt was passed out, OD'd on heroin, and I had to perform CPR on her until the ambulance arrived. I honestly didn't know if we were ever gonna save up, because I needed, help moving. I can't just, move on my own or anything like that. Thankfully, thank the good Lord up above that I ended up, I have friends, and like they actually wanted to live with me, so.
I definitely stayed home a lot and pushed myself away from people, and it did ruin like some of my relationships with people, like family. I've had some friends that I've lost over it, and honestly, at the time I lost the relationship with myself. Like it made me a complete and total different person. I've struggled with anxiety my whole life, honestly. I've always been anxious, but I really didn't have like depression until my high school years. It didn't really get bad until my sophomore year of high school, like certain events that happened that year. And what I mean by depressed is like, not wanting to wake up, not wanting to go to school. My mom normally would wake me up in the morning before she went to work, so I could get ready for school, because I drove myself. And sometimes I just would pretend to get up and then just go right back to sleep because I didn't feel like going to school that day. My anxiety got to the point where I didn't continue going to school. Like, I dropped out because like I was just so anxious to go. Like, I couldn't, like, I would have panic attacks walking in the hallways. I dropped out of high school when I was 17. I think it was in August of 2017. I went to the principal and I told her that I just want to be homeschooled at least until after the year is over. And she looked at me and said, I will not homeschool you unless you had 2 broke legs or you were pregnant. So like, I called my mom, told her all that, and then I think that was my last day officially of school, is after she said that to me. I enrolled into Penn Foster, which is an online high school, and I graduated with a diploma from there with amazing grades, way better than what they were when I was in high school. And it was expensive, but it was worth it. If I'm feeling like stressed or anxious, I have a notebook. It's like a journal, basically. I don't write in it, but I love doing like planning for stuff, like planning my whole life, basically. I feel like that gets rid of like most of my stress. And I have like a whole page in it of like things that I have done or that I like to do that help me feel better and not feel stressed or anxious or anything.
My depression didn't have power over me. The pain, it can't control you. You just have to recognize them. And you have to make the conscious decision to say, that's not who I am. This does not define me. I'm not gonna let it take over my life. I'm not gonna let it cause me to wanna end my life. Even though my parents did fight a lot, they supported me when I would see my therapist. They took me to see my psychiatrist. They got me help, and I had access to that help. When you get to rock bottom, you can only go up. You know, once you get so far, you can't go any lower. And that's what I did.
I see your love, I feel it too.